The story of Ukraine, a nation that refused to disappear, from ancient tribes to modern wars. This is Ukraine's powerful journey through history. This is the story of Ukraine, a land of deep cultural and spiritual connection, a land caught between empires but refused to be conquered in spirit, a land of ancient roots, brave hearts, and songs that never stop being sung to pass on history and culture. Going down the origin and history of the people of Ukraine, someone may see it being very complex as it is deeply interwoven with the histories of neighboring countries, especially Russia, Poland, and Lithuania, as well as ancient civilizations such as the Scythians and Kievan Rus. However, if you are looking for something more comprehensive to quickly understand the evolution of Ukraine, then you are at the right place. In this video, you will have a clear and factual breakdown of Ukraine's historical roots and evolution. To start with, long before geographical and political borders were drawn, there was a wide open land of rivers, forests, and rich soil, fertile enough that could feed millions. People settled and farmed these lands thousands of years ago. They built homes from clay and wood and painted beautiful patterns on pots. This was the beginning of Ukraine, and if you must know, it was the home to some of Europe's earliest civilizations. The Trypillians, who could be considered as the original inhabitants, lived and farmed these lands 7,000 years ago. Then came the powerful Scythians, fierce horse-riding warriors who rode the steppes like ghosts of the wind. Within the 9th century, Slavic tribes along the Dnipro River started uniting. Suddenly, from the north came the fierce horse-riding warriors like the Vikings, called the Varangians. They loved the beautiful landscape and fertile soil. With their influence, they helped organize these lands into a new kingdom called Kievan Rus. This was the rise of a powerful land called Kievan Rus, today known as Ukraine. At its heart was Kiev, a beautiful city sitting on the hills above the river where princes ruled over vast lands. Kyiv, the capital of today's modern Ukraine, became the heart of this powerful Slavic kingdom, Kievan Rus. In 988, Prince Vladimir brought Christianity to his people, a decision that shaped Ukrainian culture for centuries. Kyiv became a center of trade, law, and Orthodox Christianity. Kievan Rus, with its heart, being Kyiv, was not just a place. It was a civilization, where ideas, stories, and art flourished. However, greatness doesn't last forever. Then darkness struck over Kievan Rus, the collapse and conquest of Kiev. In 1240, the furious Mongols invaded the land and burned Kiev to the ground. The old state of Kievan Rus fell apart, and Ukraine became a land shared between powers. In the west, Poland and Lithuania took control. In the east, new powers like Moscow or Russia began to rise. However, the Ukrainian people didn't disappear. In tears and sorrows, they farmed, sang folk songs, and passed on their history and language in villages and towns. But they were now ruled by others, divided between Poland, Lithuania, and Russia. But the people refused to disappear. By the 1500s, a new kind of people emerged in the wild, called the Cossacks. They were free horse riders, fierce and furious warriors who lived outside the rules of kings and lords. They rose, fighting for freedom and to recover and protect their land from invaders. Under their leader, Bohdan Khmelnytsky, they led a rebellion in 1648 against Polish rule. They wanted their own rights, their own religion, Eastern Orthodox, and their own place in the world. They formed a semi-independent state called the Cossack Hetmanate. However, they were not strong enough to survive the pressure from border nations. For them to survive, they were left with no other choice than to make a pact with the Russian Tsar. This decision brought protection, however, at a price of total domination by Russia. Their alliance with Russia in 1654 led to centuries of domination. As time went by, most of Ukraine was slowly absorbed into the Russian Empire. Russia wanted total assimilation. Under the Russian Empire, Ukrainian language and identity were suppressed and almost wiped out. Ukrainian books were banned, schools were Russified, but the people wouldn't forget their roots. They held on to their culture and history through songs, embroidery, and quiet defiance. In the minds of the people, a new dream and idea was born and began to grow: Ukrainian nationalism. This time not in the sense of war or hate, but the belief that Ukrainians were once a people with their own roots, lands, and history, who deserve to live freely in their own land, language, and culture. After the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, Ukraine declared independence. It was a fragile dream consisting of civil wars, chaos, and foreign invasions. By the early 1920s, most of Ukraine became part of the new Soviet Union. Again, a dream cut short. Another nightmare struck and shattered their dreams, the Holodomor, otherwise called the death by hunger, or man-made famine. In 1932 to 1933, under Stalin, grain, which was the main produce of Ukraine, was taken from Ukrainian farmers by force. Millions died from this man-made famine that many would term a genocide. It was a bleeding wound that still bleeds in the memory of Ukrainians until this day that the story's being told. As if that wasn't enough, World War II broke out and brought more pain and horror. Ukraine was invaded by Nazi Germany, then taken again by the Soviets. The entire towns were destroyed. Millions died and others displaced. After the war, Ukraine remained under Soviet rule. It didn't end there. Even at this, the people and nation of Ukraine refused to disappear. The spirit of the people endured. Under the surface, they built cities and factories, yes, but also kept singing folk songs, writing poetry in secret, and telling stories of their past. The pains and sorrows wouldn't just last forever. Then came a rebirth of Ukraine, the independence, the dream they have always wanted. Before we continue, if you're just coming across this channel for the first time, please subscribe to always get notified when we drop interesting stories like this. Also, like, comment, and share for others to benefit. The dream of Ukraine's independence finally came true. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and for the first time in centuries, Ukraine became truly independent. The people voted overwhelmingly for freedom and restored their culture and history. Ukrainian became the official language. A new flag was raised, blue for sky, yellow for wheat fields, and the hopes of the people were restored. However, independence was not easy though. Corruption, economic hardship, and political struggle divided the country. Some leaders looked to Europe, others to Russia. The people were often caught in the middle. In 2004, Ukrainians rose up in the Orange Revolution, demanding fair elections. 10 years later, in 2014, they rose again in the Euromaidan Revolution, demanding their leader to sign a deal to join the EU. Their president or leader, backed by Russia, refused to sign the EU deal. Protests filled the streets of Kyiv. Many died and as many wounded. But the people won, the president fled, and a new path was open. The door to democracy was open. Democracy won over dictatorship. Then Russia annexed Crimea and war broke out in eastern Ukraine. In February 2022, Russia, with its heavy war artillery, launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in what they thought Ukraine would go on its knees in 2 weeks. The world watched in shock, but Ukraine did not collapse, and Ukraine wouldn't just disappear. Farmers stood in front of tanks. Grandmothers made Molotov cocktails. Soldiers and civilians defended cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. Ukrainian artists, teachers, and volunteers kept the country alive, even in the darkest hours. The world saw what Ukrainians had always known. The world realized that Ukraine is not a borderland. They are not Little Russia. They are a people of deep roots in history, proud culture, and unbreakable will. The whole world saw it clearly. This was not just a war. It was a fight for identity. The story of Ukraine is not just about wars and borders. It's about a people who will never forget their roots and who will never stop being themselves. They have been ruled by kings, crushed by empires, and invaded by neighbors, inflicted with pains and sorrows. But through it all, they held on to their language, their songs, their memories. They are still standing, not as victims of history, but as authors of their own history. Take this pensive point home. Ukraine is not a borderland. Ukraine is a nation, ancient, wounded, but alive. A land of poetry and pain, of song and soil, of fierce love for freedom. This is Ukraine, and its people are still writing their story. Ukraine has refused to disappear. If this story moved you, like it, comment and subscribe to this channel, and do not forget to share to as many as possible, because the world should know. Ukraine didn't just survive history, it made it.